What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the One and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, and we're with you guys after the Cavs 120-109 win over the Indiana Pacers. And as we knew coming into tonight's contest, yes, it was a quote-unquote rematch of the Eastern Conference semifinals, but this Pacers team is extremely different from what it was just a few months ago. No Tyrese Halliburton because of the Achilles tear, and Miles Turner is on the Milwaukee Bucks, as we saw just a couple weeks ago. Chris, obviously this is another win in the win column for the Cleveland Cavaliers. What did you take away from tonight's contest? And did you learn anything tonight?
No, I don't think we learned anything tonight. Come on, the Pacers are 2-14. They haven't won a game away from home. They're going to be in the lottery this year. I don't think that we learned anything specifically about the Cavs. I think it just reaffirmed our belief that when Darius Garland is healthy, this offense functions in a different kind of way. When Darius Garland is healthy, Evan Mobley is more comfortable. The offense itself is more comfortable. Donovan Mitchell is able to play off the ball a little bit more. So the engine to the Cavs offense is Darius, and their ceiling is just very, very different when he plays. And he was very good tonight in terms of getting into the paint, attracting attention, causing the defense to collapse, scoring for himself, creating for others. And when Darius is able to take some of those ball handling responsibilities and those shot creation responsibilities, same thing with Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley doesn't have to start his offense beyond the three-point line. He can start it inside the three-point line. He can finish around the rim. He can play at the elbow. He could take the guys off the dribble that he was able to take off the dribble for Indiana. So nothing that we learned necessarily. I just think it reaffirmed the importance of Darius, which becomes more apparent when this version of the Cleveland Cavaliers doesn't have him.
Chris, we talked before tonight's game about just the joy also that Darius Garland brings to the court because of how important that is and how much we've seen that over the last couple of years. And even for Darius, it's important for him to have that level of joy to be successful. Jalen Tyson is now kind of being thrown in that bucket as well, as Kenny Atkinson would say. He's a player that plays with energy. He's a player that plays with ferocity. He's a player that just likes to have fun. And you could see it when he's talking to the media. Like, he turns this little switch on to be more professional than usual. But when he's around his teammates and he's a happy-go-lucky, smiley kind of guy, it alleviates some of the pressure that he might be feeling as a second-year player who is now being thrust into the starting lineup with Sam Merrill and Max Strus still out for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Tonight, he was 6 of 7 from the field, 2 of 3 from the three-point line, 14 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists. Not only was the joy a factor when it comes to Darius and Jalen, but it felt like those two areas where the Cavs needed them most, the defensive intensity and the rebounding, and Darius Garland's playmaking and his offensive production, you kind of saw that firsthand against the Pacers.
You did, and I give Jalen a lot of credit. Kenny Atkinson talked about this following the game, just the way that he has transformed himself, the player that he has turned himself into because he needed to turn himself into that player for this team. In a different situation, Jalen might be asked to do different things. In a different situation, he might be asked to be more of a playmaker. He might have the ball in his hands more. He might have a higher usage rate. But for this team, they need a certain type of player. They need a certain type of skill set. They need a certain type of guy to fill a specific role. And I give him a lot of credit for being willing to do that and finding his niche for this team. He's knocking down open threes. He's making the most of the shot attempts that he does get. He's picking up guys full court. He's trying to be sturdy at the point of attack. He's guarding oftentimes the opponent's best perimeter player. And When he's in the starting lineup, there's just a different energy to this team. There's just a different tenacity to this team. There's a different ferocity to this team. And I think it makes sense that Kenny Atkinson continues to go to Jalen when Sam's missing or Darius is missing or one of the members of the starting lineup, the every night starting lineup is missing because Jalen has shown that he can fit in and he can blend in to that particular lineup. So, having him back, you felt that as well, just like Darius. And the Cavs didn't even have Jared Allen tonight. They didn't even have Sam Merrill tonight against Indy, but they felt more like the Cavs. They felt like a more complete version of who this basketball team is and who this basketball team is supposed to be. And to me, that's more about Darius than anybody else. But Jalen's a part of that too, given the way that he has played and the impact that he has made in the first part of this season.
And Chris, I mean, yes, it was the Indiana Pacers. And again, as you mentioned, they're 2-14. They're not a good basketball team without Tyrese Halliburton.
And I mean, they don't have Aaron Nesmith. They don't have Obi Toppin either. They're playing dudes like Jay Huff and somebody named Jeremiah Robinson Earl or something like that, or Jeremiah Earl Robinson, whatever his name is. I looked out there on the court and I said, who the hell is number 25 with the bright shoes? They're playing Garrison Matthews, for the love of God, in today's NBA, who they just signed. So it's not just Tyrese. Tyrese is the engine to that offense. And I talked about this last year, Ethan. He was on the periphery of my MVP ballot, and he was on the periphery of my first team All NBA because I just think he's that important to his team. And you're feeling that, obviously, but it's not just him. It's also Aaron Nesmith, who Cavs fans hated throughout the course of the playoffs because of his tenacity, because of his timely three-point shooting, because of the way that he was picking up guys full court. And then Obi Toppin had a really good series against the Cavs, too. And he had a really good playoff run coming off the bench for Indy. You take those three guys out of the mix, man, it just becomes really, really difficult for them to consistently compete in some of these games. And credit to the Cavs. When you have a team like this, you're supposed to go up by 22 at one point, right? You're supposed to lead for around 41 minutes in the game. The first quarter was very competitive. It was tightly contested. But as the game went on, the Cavs' superiority, the Cavs' depth, the Cavs' high-end talent, the Cavs' everything started to show itself. And that's what they're supposed to do against these kinds of teams. That's what they did last year against these kinds of teams.
To the point that I was going to make was, since Tyrese Halliburton is not on the floor, we kind of saw the impact of not having an offensive engine, especially with Darius Garland being out. So that's the main difference when it comes to what the Pacers have been doing this season and trying to find offense. But they've still found different players to have an impact. The Indiana Pacers had 3 players combined for 79 of their 109 points tonight. Andrew Nembhard, Pascal Siakam, and Benedict Mathurin. And Chris, I don't want to harp on their players as much, but how quietly behind the scenes a player can kind of not get the recognition or get caught up in being a side character in a all-star driven league. And my point to this is DeAndre Hunter continues to have a good season as we started the year. He's had 20 points in tonight's contest. He was 8 of 16, 3 of 9 from the three-point line, 7 rebounds, which, as Jimmy would say, that's a good number for a 6'8" power forward or small forward, depending on how the Cavs are using him. But more than not, I think DeAndre Hunter is, especially with Darius Garland coming back and Sam Merrill and Max Strus and all these other players, he's starting to get acclimated into the system that the Cavs ideally had planned for him when they went and traded for him. And I think that's what's important, is that he's kind of doing this quietly. He's kind of having an impact without needing to have the ball in his hands or feeling like he's taking every shot. And he took 16 shots tonight. I asked the other night when the Cavs lost if he felt like there were shots out there that he left. And he said no, but then he looked at the box score and was like, well, looking at the hierarchy of the system, maybe I could have taken more. And I think what DeAndre Hunter's role has been defensively and offensively is starting to come to light. And again, in part because of having that offensive engine in Darius Garland, but also just knowing that his role is being more solidified. And maybe that's because he's in the starting unit. Maybe that's because he's getting his touches in different spots. Maybe it's because the Cavs understand what he can do functionally at the point of attack, but also when it comes to breaking down defenses when called upon. And that's kind of what Kenny Atkinson has used him as during rotations. He's on the floor when Darius or Donovan or Evan aren't on the floor as well, because now you see a player that is good in isolation situations or alongside Lonzo Ball who can find him in his spots, in his pockets, where that allows him to be the most successful.
20 points in back-to-back games, 20 points in 5 of the last 8 games for DeAndre. And I think there's still more that the Cavs can pull out of him, Ethan. I think they have been toying with him in drive situations. Get him the ball either at the top of the key and allow him to take his guy off the dribble, get him the ball maybe at the elbow, see if he can take his guy off the dribble. So I just think there are different ways that the Cavs can continue to use DeAndre. And it's almost like filling in the gaps. What do they need on that particular night? What do they need against that particular opponent? And his versatility on the offensive end of the floor, the different ways that he can score, the different ways that he can be deployed, it just makes the Cavs more unpredictable. And we hate talking about last year's Cavs versus this year's Cavs because we understand that they're very, very different. The pieces are different. The way that they're operating is different. The guys that have been available to them, that's different too. But I think one of the things that made the Cavs so difficult for opponents to defend is that they had so many places that they could go offensively, and they were so unpredictable. During the JB Bickerstaff era, what the Cavs were going to do offensively was very straightforward, and everybody in the league knew exactly what was coming. There just wasn't a lot of variance to the attack. There wasn't a lot of unpredictability. And I think the Cavs, they benefit greatly from the way that DeAndre can score and the way that he can be used on the offensive end of the floor, because it just makes them more unpredictable. It makes them more difficult to guard. Obviously, if Darius, Donovan, and Evan are going to be on the floor at the same time, the eyes of the defense are going to be focused in that general direction. But then, DeAndre benefits greatly from that, because think about the kind of defenders that he's going to be able to go up against. Think about the kind of defenders that he's going to be able to exploit. Some of the better defenders are going to be on those other guys. So this just allows him to capitalize on those things. And I like the aggressiveness that he's playing with. He's not hesitating when he's getting open shots. And like I said, I like the fact that he has added an element of drives to this team, because the drives are supposed to be ingrained in this offense. And that's kind of where everything starts. And if it's Darius, that's fine. If it's Donovan, that's fine. But adding another element, another guy who's capable of driving and collapsing the defense and making plays out of that, that just makes this team way more formidable. And if Evan is going to continue to be a little bit uncomfortable in those situations, especially in specific matchups when it comes to attacking off the dribble, then they don't have to use Evan that way. They can switch and say, we're going to use DeAndre that way instead.
Evan, to me tonight, was super aggressive. He was a player that was getting into the body of his defenders. This is one of those matchups where you needed that to happen. And I'm not to say that he hadn't done that earlier into the season, but maybe he had a little bit more success tonight. 7 of 13 from the field, 22 points. And then also, I know this isn't fantastic, but 7 of 11 from the free throw line, 63.6%. Chris, it feels like that's better than it has been in the past, which is disappointing to say, but also understanding that he had 12 rebounds, 4 on the offensive glass. That portion's huge, and 4 assists. And I liked how Darius Garland said it tonight, that he has the ability to pass. So if you get him the ball in the pocket, you force defenders to make decisions, whether they're going to collapse, whether they're going to spread out. And obviously, you mentioned it there, Chris. If Jarrett Allen, if Darius Garland, if Donovan Mitchell, if DeAndre Hunter are on the floor with Evan Mobley, it allows him to have more options and less players are willing to spray away from their players because they understand the value that they have and the gravity that they hold on their own.
I think the other thing is he was just playing closer to the basket. Um, he had 7 made shots, 4 or 5 were dunks. That's Evan. That's him playing with force. That's a level of aggressiveness. Now, here's the thing. He's got to show that against better opponents. He's got to show that against better defenders. Picking on Isaiah Jackson, who doesn't belong in any starting lineup, that's one thing, right? This was an advantageous matchup for Evan Mobley, and he exploited it. He exploited it the way that he should. He got near the basket. He played with ferocity. He beat whoever it was off the dribble. Sometimes it was Isaiah Jackson. Other times it was Jay Huff. Like I said, Jarris Walker, Jeremiah Robinson Earl. That's very, very different than what Evan was playing against the other night in Houston, right? So it's a great sign. It's a great step forward for him. He's just got to continue this and play with this level of confidence even when the competition ramps up. And I do think it's going to continue to be beneficial for Evan. Like I said, he had 7 made shots. I think 4 or 5 of them were assisted. When he doesn't have to create on his own, he looks more comfortable. Now, obviously, the Cavs want him to create on his own. That's part of the, hey, we're going to let him spread his wings. Hey, we're going to try and unleash him a different kind of way. We're going to try and get him to evolve his offensive game where he can do those kinds of things. Because if we get into a playoff environment and teams are trying to take Darius out of it and they're trying to take Donovan out of it, we're going to need Evan to be that kind of guy. But for now, as it stands here in November, he's still not as comfortable doing that. It's still a work in progress. There are still growing pains attached to that. So when he has other guys setting him up the way that he did tonight, getting him easier shots, making it so that he didn't have to work as hard for his scores or his offense, it just felt different. It just looked different. And he looked way more comfortable in this particular role than what he has been for the majority of the first 17 games because Darius has only played in 4 of them.
Yeah, Chris, and to that point, I mean, the Cavs had 28 assists on 43 makes tonight, which is huge. And 3 players having 5 or more. Donovan Mitchell having 5, Darius Garland having 7, Lonzo Ball having 5 as well. And I want to get into that pairing really quickly because I feel like the geometry of the floor kind of changes when it comes to the offense and the defensive structure when you have Lonzo Ball and Darius Garland on the floor at the same time for this Cavs team, because you understand that Lonzo has his strengths, right? Getting in transition, creating very quick offense, barely touching the ball. I haven't looked at the stats, but maybe has the ball in his hands as minimum as anybody around the league. But Darius Garland, then also when you get into that half court, and we've talked about this to start the season, them needing a creator in the half court when the system gets bogged down or they're not able to get these early shot clock opportunities. But Darius Garland being able to break down his defender, get into the paint, and then create opportunities from there is extremely important. And having those two alongside each other and being able to learn how each other plays and how each other can benefit from that. And even Darius Garland, who loves to run the floor, getting some open early shot clock opportunities with Lonzo Ball in the lineup is going to help him as well. And I think just the passing acumen, the level of IQ is being risen when both of those guys are on the court. And plus on the defensive end, Lonzo Ball, 6'6", can then guard some small forwards alongside if Kenny Atkinson wants to go with the lineup with Donovan Mitchell in it as well. You now have 2 very capable scorers and Lonzo Ball as a defender to help switch on these players who are going to get attacked on the other end of the floor.
I think there's something that we have to monitor here, Ethan, over the next couple of games. Darius looks like he's still being bothered by the toe. And I do think it's a tricky injury for him to play through and come back from. And I do think there's a mental component to it, just like there's a physical component to it. But he was having an extended conversation in the locker room tonight with head trainer Steve Spiro. And as those two guys were talking, you could sense a little bit of annoyance from Darius that he is still kind of being bothered, and he kept pointing down at his feet. And then after he had that extended conversation with head trainer Steve Spiro, another member of the Cavs training staff came out to talk to Darius and to look at Darius's foot. And I don't know what the Cavs are going to do in terms of Sunday into Monday. It's a back-to-back. This is a 3 and 4 night stretch, but just keep an eye on that injury report when it comes out Saturday to see if Darius is on it, because he's still not as right as I think he would want to be. And that extended conversation with the head trainer in the locker room, I thought was very, very telling. And there was a point toward the end of the game where Darius was kind of laboring and he had to shake something off. And I asked him about it following the game. And he said he was okay. And he said it was just like a stinger or something like that. But I think we always have to monitor just Darius and how he plays through this and how his toe responds to this game or a stretch of games. And I think the Cavs are going to have to continue to monitor that as well. I think they're going to have to continue to use injury maintenance as well. So that's something to watch. And then with Darius and Lonzo together, Kenny's going to have to ask himself throughout the course of these games, throughout the course of this schedule, just how much does he want to play these guys together? How much can he play these guys together? You know, if he's going to have this set rotation with Donovan coming out at the 7-minute mark of the first quarter and Lonzo going in, that's going to be an interesting time, theoretically, for Darius and Lonzo to share the court. And that's a lot of passing. That's a lot of vision. That's a very, very interesting combination. And the other thing that helps is, you know, Lonzo has the size, he has the length. So some of these taller, more physical guards that might be problems for Darius to defend, he doesn't have to deal with those to the same level, sharing the floor with Lonzo. And you could just sense in talking to Darius following the game, Ethan, that he was excited about that potential pairing. He was excited about sharing the floor with Lonzo and the kind of IQ that is out there with both those guys together, the kind of playmaking that's out there with both those guys together, the kind of passing and vision that's out there with them two together. And for Lonzo, look, I mean, he wasn't great from a stat sheets perspective tonight against Indy. He still isn't making shots. He seems pretty annoyed by it. The other night, he finally made a three and he put his hands together in prayer and he looked up to the heavens like, thank you, God, I finally made a corner three. So he tried to do the same thing in tonight's game against Indiana, where he caught the ball and he took a rhythm dribble, and that didn't work. It worked the other night. It didn't work tonight. But like the thing about Lonzo is you feel his impact even when he's missing shots. You feel his impact even if he's not scoring the ball. So he plays 25 minutes or so tonight against Indy, and he just like finds a way to make an impact beyond scoring, beyond making shots. And I think that's an important element that Lonzo brings. And if Darius is healthy and capable of playing, then they're not going to need as much scoring from Lonzo, right? If Sam Merrill is healthy, they're not going to need as much scoring from Lonzo. It would be better for sure if he made these open threes, especially if they're in the flow of the offense. But if the Cavs have DeAndre scoring, Jalen scoring, Evan, Donovan, Darius, Sam, how do you find another way to impact the game? And the beauty, I think, of Lonzo and the pickup of Lonzo this offseason is that he doesn't have to score to make an impact on this team.
The biggest thing when it comes to the injury updates for this team is that one Sunday to Monday is a back-to-back. So Kenny Atkinson is going to have to make a decision because Lonzo Ball is still not playing in back-to-backs to start the season, who he's going to play Monday and Sunday, depending on if Darius Garland is going to be on the injury report. And I think it would be likely. And Kenny Atkinson has already talked early on into the season about how he doesn't want to play a game where both of those guys are out. And we've already seen them have to do that at least once this season. And the offensive structure looked very shaken. But also to your point, Chris, about the box score of Lonzo Ball, I don't necessarily think this is a bad box score for Lonzo Ball. 7 rebounds, which is huge for a guard. 5 assists, as I mentioned earlier, 1 block, and a plus 12 on the floor. But he was 0 of 2 from the field. And of course, this is my thing, has been my thing with Lonzo Ball to start the season. Maybe there was this feeling because there were so many players out that you had to shoot the basketball, but there have been multiple times this year where obviously you're an NBA player. Obviously, you can shoot at a high caliber. Obviously, you are a confident player, and that's an important portion of shooting the ball. But sometimes I look at some of the shots that Lonzo Ball has taken, and I'm like, why? You are not needed as a scorer when it comes to this team. And I think, as you mentioned, adding players back in who are known for that. And then he gets into the comfortability of the offense and what he's good at. And it's not going to necessarily take away from the frustration from when you make shots, but making an impact in a different way is definitely going to fill his cup in a different way, I should say. Because Lonzo's always been known as a passer and also just understanding where he flows into the offense and taking shots, not necessarily what he's asked to do or called upon. As you mentioned, Chris, what the Cavs did to make a decision to go get Lonzo Ball for Isaac Okoro, it wasn't because of his shooting and his scoring necessarily, although it was supposedly better, but it's because of what he can do offensively with the ball in his hands and creating for others, and then defensively not being on the same level as Isaac Okoro, but still being a plus defender.
Yeah. The other offseason acquisition was Larry Nance Jr., and he was back in the rotation tonight. Jarrett Allen missed the game, so that allowed Larry to get some run, but it's still a little bit shaky when it comes to Nance. There was a stretch there that the Cavs were using him as the 5, and Indiana had bigger, bulkier Tony Bradley out there, and then Kenny quickly called on Evan Mobley to shift Larry to the 4. So I think Kenny is still, remember last year where Kenny was still trying to figure things out pertaining to DeAndre? Start him, come off the bench, play him at the 4, play him at the 3. Where does he like the ball on the floor? I think Kenny's still trying to learn those things about Larry, and I think Larry is still trying to figure out where does he fit with this team. Um, and it just hasn't been, to use a Kenny Atkinson phrase, it just has not been smooth sailing. So it'll be interesting to see just how Kenny uses Larry, if he does use Larry when Jarrett returns from this minor. I'm told it's a minor finger issue that he has. It's his right hand. It's his third finger on his right hand. So it's not the same one that is fractured. It's not even the same hand. So it'll be interesting to see if Jarrett plays Sunday or if he plays Monday. What does that mean for Larry? Or is Larry's role just going to turn into the guy who becomes more available if Evan is resting a night, or if Jarrett can't play for one reason or another? Is he just going to end up being that swing big temporarily while the Cavs continue to work through all of these kinds of things? So I also think the matchup against Indiana kind of played into going to Larry, putting him back in the rotation. Indy doesn't have great size. They aren't that imposing physically. So I think Kenny felt like he could kind of get away with it a little bit more. Not only did he need Larry because Jarrett wasn't available, but I think Kenny felt like he could get away with it a little bit more just because, Indiana does tend to play small. There were times where it looked like Siakam was kind of floating between the 4 and the 5. So I think because of the matchup that played into Larry's favor and it got him some run, but it was still a little bit clunky with him trying to figure out, okay, where do I go on the floor? He had a corner 3 that hit the side of the backboard that was wide open. Nobody within 10 feet of him. So it just looks like a guy who is still searching. And I think as much as he is searching, the Cavs are searching for how to best deploy him as well. And I think they'll get there. I think eventually they'll get there. But right now, it's just not great.
Chris, obviously, to your point about Larry Nance Jr., Jared Allen being out does help that. But I also think it's important to note that Naquan Tomlin didn't have his greatest game
No.
tonight. And I think when you talk about matchups, and I think when you talk about schematics and all these things that Kay Atkinson has to make decisions on, he went away from Naquan Tomlin after his first stint because of how it wasn't looking right when it comes to him being on the floor. And obviously, some matchups are going to be more beneficial for Naquan Tomlin. And also, sometimes we're going to get reminded that he's second year into the league and still on a two-way contract and still learning the game of basketball in itself. But to your point, Chris, the Cavs play the Los Angeles Clippers on Sunday, and they have two imposing bigs when it comes to Ivica Zubac, Brook Lopez coming off the bench, John Collins available. Sure, this Clippers team is 4-11, but if Jared Allen's not available, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the Cavs deploy their front court and how Evan Mobley plays. These are the types of opponents where we're curious to see how Evan Mobley is going to react, how aggressive he's going to be, how close he's going to be able to get to the basket, because you're not going to be able to back down Zubac, Brook Lopez, or John Collins the same kind of way that you do players tonight who are not as strong, are not as capable, are not as prepared for that kind of level of physicality as some of the Clippers players are. So I do think the front court question will come more so on Sunday than it did tonight, but that's more so because of matchups, and that's so much more about who this Cavs team is going to be
Mm.
when it comes to depth, because we've seen the wings play, we've seen the guards play, we've seen the differential and how they can be deployed and utilized by Kenny Atkinson. But this front court depth still questioned, because this is supposed to be the most deep front court bench that the Cavs have had in years.
Well, the other thing about Naquan, the other thing that we have to remember is the more success you have, the more opportunity you get, the more playing time you get, the more the opponent knows about you. And the more the opponent knows about you, the more they can exploit your weaknesses, and they can take away things that you want to do that make you successful. So I think more teams are more aware of Naquan. He was in the starting lineup the other night, for goodness sake. So that's an adjustment that he's going to have to make. That's always a challenge for a young player, that once the team that you're playing against starts making adjustments to you, can you then make the proper adjustments? Can you counter those things? So that's going to be a big part of the growth of Naquan Tomlin. And maybe Sunday happens to be more of a Thomas Bryant day. Maybe they feel like they need his size, they need his energy, they need his force. I wouldn't call him bulky necessarily, but he does have more size than Larry does. So if Jarrett can't play on Sunday and you're playing against Zubac, who is a former teammate of Larry Nance Jr., one of Larry's favorite teammates that he's ever had, and John Collins, bouncy, active, things along those lines, you might need to match that with Thomas Bryant. And I think that's the thing that makes the Cavs, that's where the depth comes into play. Because as we saw tonight, if Naquan isn't being effective, then you give Larry more minutes, right? And you hope that Larry is going to give you something more than what he has at the beginning of the season. You hope that Larry is going to give you some kind of production that is similar to what he gave to the Atlanta Hawks last year. But if Larry doesn't do that, okay, then you go to Thomas Bryant. You know, there is that fluidity that the Cavs have when it comes to the back end of their rotation. As we've talked about so many different times on this podcast, the top of the rotation, the first 7-8 spots are pretty much locked in. They're very, very consistent. And then it becomes very fluid at the back end. And if it's not Naquan, then maybe it's Larry. If it's not Naquan or Larry, then maybe it's Thomas Bryant. If it's not Naquan, Larry, or Thomas Bryant, maybe it's Dean Wade. You know, there's just options that Kenny Atkinson has. And they're probably not as as compelling as we thought they were going to be based on certain things that have happened at the beginning of this season and struggles that some of these guys have had. But at least they're options that Kenny feels like he can go to based on what the situation calls for and maybe what the opponent is throwing at the Cavs as well.
With all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.